Welcome to our weekly ECONversations podcast with our economic development heads with the city of Murrieta, Mr. Scott Agajanian, with the city of Wildomar, Ms. Kimberly Davidson, the city of Temecula, Ms. Christine Damko, and our own Wilson, Mr. Rob Moran with the county of Riverside. Always good to be able to talk with you guys about stuff. So we're going to talk today about market research and studies and the importance of those and kind of some of the misconceptions about that. And we'll start off with Ms. Kimberly Davidson, because I know you are the most recent city that has gone out for a contract for this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about and why, and then maybe we can then kind of get everyone else to, pitch in and kind of give their ideas and stories of what they're doing.
Sure. So Wildomar just turned 12 years old, and in the past 12 years, given the recession and everything else that has occurred these past 12 wonderful years, been trying 12 years to say the least. We've never had the opportunity to do a market study or any kind of market research, paid market research in the city of Wildomar. We recently approved a contract for that just last week, but there were some challenges in getting some of council and some of our citizens to understand the importance of this and why it's not just inherently part of our job to do this type of market research and why it requires extra money to go out and do this type of market research. And basically what I was telling the group just a little bit ago is that I analogized it to consumer reports. With consumer reports, you need a third-party unbiased firm that is capable. That's what they do for a living, is they do market analyses, and they are an analysis firm. City governments don't run analyses on things. We're not researchers. It's just not what we do. And we certainly don't do it to publish it and to have it be a credible source. And furthermore, you can't be the city of Wildomar telling everyone how great the city of Wildomar is. The developers want to see the data to back that up. You've got to have third-party verified information that backs up what you're saying of why you're great. I mean, you can't call up a hotel developer and say, my city's great, just trust me. Come build a hotel here, and they're going to go, oh, well, okay. As long as Kimberly Davidson at the city of Wildomar said Wildomar is great, we're just going to plunk down that $8 million and build a hotel, no problem. So the market studies are very important. They're the verified source of what the city is telling a developer or a retailer. That is the data that they need to see to believe you, I guess. That's the data backup to believe your claims that your city is the best place to build that.
And I love that Rob just turned away the secret sauce, so no one knows what it is that the county's working on. Well, also I think to that point is it also helps you to be able to tell the story to the city and the residents, what it is that you all don't know, right? Is that, a lot of times, we all think we know what's going on in our communities, but until you get that data, there's a lot of times you're like, oh, I really didn't realize that we were losing that much leakage in this area or something of that, So Christine, I know that you guys in Temecula have been using Buxton for a long time and have been very successful with their work you've done with them. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and the interesting part is we've done I would say a handful, probably more than a handful of market studies, all different types. The most, I guess, well-known is the studies that we've done in Old Town, and we have done 2. So just because you do one, like our original market study was, okay, let's, make a facade, if you will. So we added in the boardwalks and we did the beautiful arches. Well, what worked then doesn't work now. And so we actually ended up tearing up the boardwalk and put wooden stamped concrete. So my heels luckily don't get caught in the boardwalks anymore.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, yes. But I think just because you do one study does not mean that's the end all be all. And I think that's also important. And I think sometimes we have to be reminded of that ourselves, because things change, the markets change, and especially your competitors change and your market need changes.
Mhm.
So in Temecula, retail is very important to our budget. It makes up over half of our budget, I'm sure, just like most Southern California cities. And so we, for over 5 years now, have partnered with a retail analytics consultant company, research company called Buxton. They're based out of Texas. They work with many, actually their main business is to work with retailers. And then I would say maybe about 10 years ago or less, they started to reach out to governments, local governments, because they saw a need there. But essentially is, like Kimberly was talking about, when I am going out there to retail recruit, just saying Temecula is a great city and people will shop at their store does not work. And we have found that the retailers we're trying to attract, just by using our standard demographics, doesn't work. And so we have to dig deep down into those, what we call psychographics and consumer habits and their spending habits and credit card information that us as a government, we can't obtain. And so companies like Buxton are able to get credit card information, able to compile all that data into spending habits on what our residents, how far they're willing to commute to purchase an item, what they spend their money on, and as well as our visitors. So we have been, I would say, pretty successful on attracting some good retailers from that strategy. And actually, we just renewed with Buxton for another 3 years. So thankful that our city council and our city manager believes in this, because it's not cheap, right? But it is so worth it. And data is so important, because when you're retail recruiting or when you're trying to recruit a business, having that data to back up what you're saying is key. It's so important. And I personally, for retail recruiting, I feel like I can't effectively retail recruit without that in-depth analytics that myself, a government employee, I am not able to get those that information, and I need a third party.
Yeah, and I think Scott, maybe you can talk a little about this. It's not always too as just these big, large, contracts or reports. Sometimes you need a small little market report on a specific area or for a specific target. But maybe you can talk a little bit about like some of the ones that you've been involved with, in the last year or two.
Absolutely. But just to touch on what Christine was saying about data and how important it is, Patrick is really good with his dad jokes. I don't know if you guys have ever heard him. Sometimes he puts them on his email tagline. And what I want to let everybody know is where Patrick keeps all of his dad jokes, in his database.
Oh.
That's right. That happened.
We need some music, some wah, wah, wah.
How are you going to say they're right here on my dad
Oh,
joke
Gina.
a day calendar?
See, he's
Gina
got his
popped
dad's
in
calendar.
right
If you
at the
don't know,
right time there.
Perfect
Patrick
timing,
is
Gina.
the king of dad jokes, by the way, if you don't know, but I wanted to throw one in just in your honor. So, yeah, absolutely. There's big studies, small studies, tall studies, short studies, and they kind of run all over the place. we've probably done 6 or 7 studies in the last year, and most of them are tiny. I think we've done 2 or 3 population growth studies just for companies who want to check the area. A lot of times they want to know how Menifee's growing, Gina. They're looking to come into your area in your backyard right on the edge of our city. Suck a little bit of that leakage out from Menifee down our way.
No growth on that end of Murrieta.
No growth in the Menifee area. So a lot of people are excited to see how the region is responding and how it's growing. And so when I come out and talk about how fast French Valley is expanding and how we've got a Clinton Keith arterial that takes you into French Valley in just a couple of miles, it all sounds great, but unless they see it verified by someone else, people have learned over the course of minutes not to listen to anything I say. So you got to have it, brought in by an outside source, so you don't have my continual pro Murrieta bias, which is constant and strong. But not only do we do things like population growth studies, we had a COVID study just to showcase what the foot traffic change was from the middle of February to the middle of March and to the end of March. You can take pieces like that and see how your foot traffic is changing in different areas like our downtown. We did a highest and best use study for our downtown area to kind of showcase what needs are for some of the undeveloped land parcels around here and what would be the best fit for the area as we try to attract development. So it's not always, we also have a retail study, like Christine was saying. It's not always kind of the big retail piece, which is a larger study. Sometimes they're very targeted. We have a hotel study that came out in 2019, and we already feel like it's dated and we need a new one. So some of these pieces, the developers that are looking aren't looking for something that has any age to it. So as much as I try to make it sound new and fresh, when I say, yeah, we just got a study done last year, they're like, oh, well, when's the new one coming out?
Yeah.
So, the challenge with data is numbers are relevant to the time that you're in. And as you can see from the last few months, things change dramatically really quickly. And so you got to have things that are, data points that are topical, that are on target, and that are current. So we're constantly doing these kinds of things. I think it's one of the kind of the big shifts we've seen as we went to working with the Chamber of Commerce, who put together a site selector website and wanted to put data points up on there. It's one of the things that we've really focused on in getting better at, because I think for a long, long time, we've been really focused on looking up the data ourselves, and we realized that it's much better to not have me look up the data myself. On to you, Gina.
So Gina, we're talking obviously, as you can tell, about, market studies and the importance of data, and also kind of the importance of educating the residents too about the importance of studies like that. So obviously, you guys have done studies over the last few years and such, but, maybe you can tell a little bit about the importance that they are for someone like you in economic development, and, to tag on to what Scott was saying about the importance that developers are looking at when it comes to those studies.
I would agree with what Scott said. It is, as far as the relevance of what's happening right now, and there's a reason why we do an annual Dorego study to that point, is because, to grab a snapshot with the growth that we're experiencing in our surrounding areas, not just us, but for us as Menifee, there's also French Valley or even Winchester, to capture what's happening, that maybe they're utilizing our our traffic networks or our circulation networks. It needs to be captured, because it's part of our overall trade area, and it's constantly changing. So we do that annually to that point. But also, it's funny because I go through the same thing with our hotel studies. It's like, it's still very, viable, the study that we had from last year. We all know that hotel construction, it doesn't happen in 9 months, so to speak, from start to finish. But with that, we've just updated our hotel study. And on the same token, we've just completed an industrial study, and just like everybody else, a retail and an office study. One of the things that we are working on is industry-specific studies, especially after coming out of COVID, on what does that look like for some of the industries that's tied to our SWRCEDs, and what does that mean? So I know that, coming out of COVID, we'll be dusting off some of our numbers, but even then there's going to be a little bit of a lull or a lag after, to see how the market settles. Because, there's going to be some, just like what Chris Thornburg was telling us, there's this pent up, demand that's out there. And once that kind of settles, then you kind of have to assess, the market and what's kind of transpired afterwards. So we just think it's a timing thing that obviously we'll be dusting a lot of these off this time next year.
Very good. And then Gina, you missed it. Rob actually had like the actual menu of what's supposed to take place, but he turned it a little bit ago. So maybe Rob can kind of tell us what that secret sauce really truly is.
It was my evil plan to conquer the world. I'm not ready to release it yet.
He's like Chick-fil-A secret sauce.
Actually, there was nothing all that important on it, but I figured someone will read it and translate it and I'll get fired. So yeah, in terms of special studies, we don't do a lot of them, but we occasionally will hire, and I'm speaking in economic development. I know the county is a big place, just like the cities are. But we've done some stuff for very specialized topics like opportunity zones, or if somebody's coming in with a project, sometimes we'll ask them to provide validation. I know we're talking more on the front end, validating our markets for potential customers down the line, but sometimes as a project comes in asking for support from us, we'll ask them to provide a study, which I think, you guys probably do as well, to say, show me what your economic impact is, or that your sustainability is there.
Yep.
As a private project. But, it's kind of like, picking a doctor or a general contractor, there's the general physician that can kind of cover all these different things. And that's economic developers are, we're sort of jacks of all trade, right? Masters of none. And sometimes you need the foot doctor to come in and take a look at things, or the heart doctor to provide, sort of a specialized diagnosis of what's going on in your community. And that's kind of a loose analogy, I guess. That's what some of these experts, because they deal with this, I can't remember who mentioned it. I think it was Kim said at the very beginning, these people deal with these topics of expertise over and over again. Sometimes it's a legal topic, sometimes it's a, economic topic, and they get to know these subjects really well. And then they repeat this over and over again in different cities and different communities. So they see it from a wide range of experiences, and that's why they do what they do. They learn, and then they share that, and they sell that experience to other communities. So that it helps us do what we do. So yeah, they can most certainly have value. And a lot of times it's, we as economic developers know enough to kind of put together the preliminary information and make a good business case. But again, we're the internal body. You need somebody from the outside who's got that industry expertise to say, yeah, that's right in line with what you were thinking, or maybe you should shift that a little bit because I don't think you have what you think you've got in order to pull that off. And a lot of them are just going to, they understand what your needs are and what you're trying to accomplish, but most of them, the good ones anyway, are going to tell you, sort of what the reality of it is. And a lot of it's database nowadays. So yeah, they can play a really important role in the equation.
And I think, and the reverse might be the case in this scenario too, in that, Rob, the cities kind of look at you and the county as one of those resources in this as well. Cause I know the county has, access to a lot of different data, right? I know Scott and I just, leaned on you guys for a bunch of data that we were looking at for a grant application. But the county has a huge resource with your connections with UCR and what's going on too, which is one of those assets that each one of these cities has access to.
Absolutely, and it's no cost, and it's combinations of ESRI products and MZ, these different other economic calculators, and even within those areas of just data and studies, some of them focus on workforce development primarily because they're looking at labor and occupations, and others focus more on the business side and what the business is doing. So again, you're kind of getting into an area where there's specialties depending on what it is that you're looking for. So there's no one size fits all. And so we have various different data sources that we use for, whatever the purpose is that comes up. And yeah, absolutely, the cities can take advantage of it. It's no cost, and we love to share it.
Very good.
As part of our scope of work for the market study that we just got approved too, the research firm, at the end of it, once we understand where our gaps are and where our opportunities are, they're going to help us reach out to those developers that can fill those gaps. And that's going to be a much different phone call too. Instead of the city of Wildomar calling to say, hey, we've got these great opportunities here, and here's where the gaps are in either the retail or the hotel, it's going to be this research firm who has a personal relationship with some of these developers calling up saying, hey, we just completed this market study. You need to check this out. You need to come look at the city and check out what's going on there. That's a much different phone conversation than the other way around. So very valuable in that respect as well.
You know, and I want to add one thing. What I think is going to be really interesting, and a lot of times when it comes to this discussion, it sort of reverts back to retail in many respects. But I think it's going to be interesting as we sort of, to a degree, reset a little bit on how we do things, you know, after this is over. And a lot of these behaviors have become, when I say behaviors, but new habits, new ways of buying things, new ways of ordering food, new ways of doing whatever. It's going to be real interesting, even on the consulting side and on the, you know, the economic impact study side, how they kind of start analyzing the new trends that have become permanent, you know, and if malls are dead, you know, what's the new future? And I'm not saying they are, I'm just saying, you know, some people believe that, you know, what do they look like going forward? How does consumer behavior change, and how does that impact us at the city level, right? So that's going to be, and the county level, you know, people doing things differently than they did before.
Yep. I had never used Instacart prior to the COVID shutdown, and now I don't envision myself ever going back. I don't see why I need to go out and go shopping for day-to-day stuff. I could be, you know, I've already placed my order. I can be doing this. I can be doing my work, and it shows up at my front door, and I'm done, you know, and it's really not that expensive to do it that way. So for the busy working people that I think we have in this valley, this is going to be a game changer. It has been for me. So there's been some things with COVID that have changed my buying habits. I know that for a fact. And I don't know that I'll ever necessarily I don't need to spend that kind of time going and shopping for everyday commodities for my house that I don't care about, right? I don't need to physically pick out the bleach for my toilets with my own hands. It can be delivered to my front door. That's kind of cool, you know?
And you're probably going to save money, right? Because normally you'd go to like Target and you'd go get it, and then you'd spend another 40 or 50 bucks on other stuff because you're walking through the store.
At a minimum. But see, that's where it's not good for economic development.
That's true.
We've got everyone at home just ordering only what they need. But yes, in my case, very much so. If I don't set foot into Target, it's $100 an hour, basically. For me. So if I don't set foot into Target in Murrieta, Scott, I shop at Target in Murrieta.
And that's a good choice.
We don't have
I
one.
recommend all of you do that.
I don't have one yet in Wildomar, but yeah, it is. It's definitely, there has been some things with this COVID shutdown I know that have probably forever changed my buying habits. So
Yeah.
I can factor that out to the rest of the world and say, yeah, there's going to be a lot that's going to be different coming out of this.
It's forced us all into different things and different, you know, tools that we never used before. You know, with Zoom like this, we never used this to the extent we have now, but we all know that, you know, there are certain meetings we'll never do in person again because we can do them much more easily and effectively this way.
Yeah.
You know, but Rob, you make a great point, because, you know, one thing that I know we've talked about here in, you know, the last few weeks or so is that, you know, there's this mind shift when it comes to the fast casual, and how many more of those are going to want and demand drive-throughs now, right? Because of the new norm. So that changes everything, right? It just changes how we have to look at footprints within shopping centers, how developers look at shopping centers. And that's just one little aspect. There's going to be a lot of different aspects to how, you know, how these are going to shift. And so the studies are going to be changing dramatically, I agree, over the next, you know, couple of years as we catch up to what is going to be expected after we come out of this.
I think the outdoor dining is going to shift too, whereas in the past we've had restaurants that have mostly been, except for downtown public, have been mostly 80% inside and 20% patio. I think that's going to shift, where downtown public is more like 80% patio and 20% indoor.
That's a good point.
That's just going to shift going forward, I think, and that's going to greatly change the footprint of how things will be built in the future. And then for cities that already have that type of retail and restaurant use already built out, what's going to change in the future? Are they going to have, are the restaurateurs and or the development companies going to need to tear down the current structures to provide for an outdoor eating space? Like, for example, Finch and Wildomar was allowed to pretty much maintain being open because it has those large roll-up doors. So maybe we'll see more of that into the future. They can only be at half occupancy, but they had kind of a different game plan than almost any other restaurant in this valley because they had those large roll-up doors. So they got special consideration from the health department. That's really interesting to note. A lot of restaurants would, I bet a lot of restaurants in this valley would be tearing out that front wall and putting in a roll-up door if they understood more of that better, and how that's going to change our eating habits into the future.
You know what? That's a great point, Kim. And I was just thinking about that, is all it takes is a couple of months of lost rent on a landlord to make them rethink how they build their buildings. And to some extent, they're going to want a pandemic proof, because this year it's COVID-19. You never know what it could be a couple of years from now. And if we've got this constant sort of trigger point that maybe it's not, government lockdowns or shutdowns, but it's just consumer behavior saying, I don't want to be in a room with a bunch of people. I'd rather be, can I sit outside? Are these new centers, whether they're restaurants or just other types of shopping experiences, going to modify their physical footprint, just as you described, to give, and not so much the end user, but the owner, the landlord, saying, I want as much flexibility as I possibly can. Maybe it's for the dining experience and the ambiance, but the other part is, hey, if I've got to go through another shutdown, I want to be able to open up those doors and start serving people outside so I can collect my rent every month and those businesses can stay open. And that will be interesting to see, as opposed to the, maybe the strip center that's just one suite after another with no outdoor space that can't reopen. And who's going to be the progressive developer landlord who's going to say, I want to change things around so I can maximize my ability to operate and collect rent?
Well, and to tie that back to the original question, is market studies or studies in general do a lot of forecasting. So, they could be like, okay, city, like you need to start changing your zoning code to allow this, or change your setbacks, or, so that right there is a value of doing these continual studies.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. Cause like you have in Old Town, it's more than just eating outside, it's retail outside and everything. And so how do you start changing for that? And how do you start figuring out that into market studies research now? But to your point is, back on the cities, is how do you start addressing that as well, for planning ahead of time?
Well, one thing for our city, we're still developing a lot of our centers. So that will be tricky for some developers that usually give that patio space for free. So to reduce the inside can also kill a plaza if they're reducing it and solely relying on patio seating, if it is that 80-20 mix or whatever that looks like for a new project. So how do they balance that to make that pencil out as well?
That's a good point too. Yeah. Yeah. Cause they're going to have to really rethink that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other last thoughts before we wrap this up?
I like Scott's red shirt.
Do you like that his glasses match his red shirt?
Matching glasses too.
He's a lover, not a fighter.
He's got a little Fritz Coleman
It's still
thing going on
kind of weird to
I'm not
me.
sure.
It's no weirder than your beard.
Well, I'll give you that.
Weird.
And it has
All
many of
right.
the same colors in it.
All Irishmen have beards, right?
Whether they want to or not, apparently, yes. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us again for our weekly ECONversations podcast. Join us next week. Next week we'll be off, although you won't know that because you're watching the recording anyways. But we'll all be off for the Labor Day weekend. Thank God. We all need a little bit of a break, and we're looking forward to that. But thank you for joining us. If you have questions for anybody, we'll have everyone's information at the end of this. But thank you all for joining us, and I appreciate your time.